November and December are fantastic months for vegetable gardening in Florida. We transitioned into our cool season in October, and now we get to enjoy cooler temperatures and fewer bugs for the next few months. Similar to October, Floridians can plant a variety of cool season crops in November and December. Some of the cool season crops that Floridians can start in November and December include arugula, beets, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbages, carrots, cauliflower, celery, collards, endive in Central and South Florida, English peas in Central and South Florida, garlic, kale, kohlrabi, lettuce in Central and South Florida, mustard, onions, potatoes in Central and South Florida, radish, spinach, Swiss chard, and turnips. Most of these crops can be planted either by planting transplants or by sowing the seeds directly into the garden soil. But a few of the crops do best when they're direct seeded into the garden instead of planting transplants. The crops that are recommended to be direct seeded include carrots, onions, peas, radish, and turnips. I'd also just like to add a couple of side notes about garlic and potatoes. Most of Florida doesn't have enough cold days for garlic to fully form bulbs, so we should ideally cold treat our garlic for 2 to 3 months in the refrigerator before planting the garlic cloves in November or December. I did another more in-depth video all about planting garlic, so if you're interested in getting more details, then please check out my video called Grow Garlic in Florida. I'll put a link to it in the description. If you want to plant garlic but don't have time to cold treat it first, then you could try planting elephant garlic. It's not exactly the same as regular garlic, but it's a close relative of garlic that can form bulbs without being cold treated first. I've never tried it myself, but I know a lot of people like to grow it because it's easier to grow in Florida than the regular garlic. In regard to potatoes, there are some variations in the dates that are recommended for planting depending on what part of Florida you're located in. The University of Florida says that potatoes can be planted in November and December in Central and South Florida, but in North Florida, it's recommended to wait until January to plant potatoes. In North and Central Florida, November is a bit too late to start most warm season vegetables from seed. Warm season crops that were started earlier in the fall will still grow and keep producing until we start getting frosts and freezes. But if we started from seed in November, most warm season vegetables wouldn't have time to mature and produce vegetable harvests before the really cold weather arrives, which often happens near the end of December. The exception to this is South Florida. According to the University of Florida, South Florida can continue planting warm season crops straight through the winter, since the southern part of the state doesn't usually get very cold. South Florida can still plant many warm season crops, some of which include beans, cucumbers, eggplant, peppers, squashes, strawberry, and tomatoes. Of the crops I mentioned, the ones I wrote DS next to are recommended to be direct seeded. So it's recommended to sow beans, cucumbers, and squashes directly into the garden when possible. There's a smaller subset of South Florida where frosts and freezes are rare, and Floridians living in these southernmost parts of Florida can even still continue planting tropical crops. This wouldn't be for all of South Florida, but zones 10B, 11A, and 11B should still be able to plant cold-sensitive crops like amaranth, calabaza, chaya, loofah, moringa, southern peas, Seminole pumpkin, and tropical spinaches. Herbs that can be planted in the fall include anise, chives, coriander, dill, fennel, lavender, lemon balm, parsley, rosemary, sage, sweet marjoram, and thyme. My garden is located in West Central Florida in Zone 9B. I did the majority of my fall planting in October, but I'll continue sowing more seeds in November and December. I'll be planting arugula, beets, broccoli, carrots, cauliflower, garlic, lettuce, onions, potatoes, and spinach. With some crops, I like to do succession plantings, meaning that I plant multiple batches of the same type of crop spaced a few weeks apart. I noted these crops with an S. So for example, I've already planted some beets, broccoli, carrots, and cauliflower, but I'll plant more every few weeks. And I've also planted some heat-tolerant varieties of lettuce, but when the weather gets cooler, I'll plant another batch of less heat-tolerant lettuce varieties. In addition to my vegetables, I'll also be planting a bunch of herbs and flowers like borage, calendula, cilantro, dill, fennel, marigold, nasturtium, sage, and thyme. A lot of these I already started from seed in October and just need to transplant out to the garden this month. But I'm still trying to catch up with all of my seed starting, so I'll be starting more seeds in November. I'm also experimenting with planting a lot of different medicinal herbs, and there's too many to list, but some of the more common ones are chamomile, echinacea, lemon balm, and valerian. I usually start most of my medicinal herbs in the springtime, but I recently read that most of them get better established when planted in the fall, so I'm trying a fall planting for the first time this year. So I'm not necessarily recommending planting medicinal herbs in the fall yet, since I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I'm just trying it and we'll see. If any of them don't do well, then I'll just replant in the spring. Florida has a pretty wide variation of climate zones and microclimates, so remember that planting dates are not going to be exactly the same in all parts of Florida. Planting guides are a good starting point for planning when to plant your crops, but it's helpful to know what zone you're in and when your first and last average frost dates are. I'm going to put links in the description to some interactive maps that you can use to zoom in and find your neighborhood's climate zone and frost dates to help narrow down your warm season planting window. I always like to experiment and see how early and how late I can get away with planting my crops. And I occasionally use season extension tools like row cover or shade cloth to buffer the extremes in temperature as needed. Keep in mind that fall and winter are during our dry season, so remember to keep your plants watered during our dry spells. If you found this video helpful, then you may want to watch my other monthly planting guide videos. I have a complete playlist of videos like this one, which I'll put a link to in the description below the video. Happy fall gardening, everyone!